So you've heard of the Socratic method before.
Mhm.
What would be a common definition that you've heard of before for Socratic method?
I would think of drawing a conclusion via questions.
Okay, so the Socratic method is where we teach by drawing conclusions via questions. Okay, and now let me ask you: do any kinds of questions work equally well, or is there one question might be a better sort of question than another for
Hmm.
drawing conclusions?
Yeah, I would think maybe two things would have to play out. One would be, well, it depends on what you're teaching, but like you know that you want to bring them somewhere, right? Because you're the teacher, right? So you've got some kind of conclusion or something you want to accomplish. So the questions have to lead in a certain way that you can't be just so open ended to where it's just like, well, tell me how you feel about this. So a question like that, like, tell me how you feel. Good. Now you tell me how you feel about that Bible, right? So that it's got to be directed in some way, but it also can't be too directed to where you're kind of forcing them without doing the critical thinking skills. That's all.
Okay, this is where my dear friend Socrates would say, "That's wonderful. I asked you what sort of questions you think we should ask or not ask. Not only did you answer that, but you anticipated another important question. Is back to the we're trying to draw conclusions, right?
Mhm.
By asking questions. You also address what sort of conclusions, and it's
Mhm.
not just any conclusion, but it's the instructor already knows we want the class to end here, right? We have a lesson to teach, right?
Mhm.
And so you've really answered two things. If Socratic teaching is in its most simple and imprecise definition, drawing a conclusion by asking questions. Now, more precisely, we want to draw the kind of conclusion the teacher is aiming at for that day by
Mhm.
means of asking questions that lead there but don't lead too directly there.
Mhm.
So my dear friend Aristotle would say there's moderation, like how direct versus indirect
Okay.
is the question. We want the sweet spot in the middle because you don't want to spoon feed the answer. You're no longer asking questions, right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, you don't want people to be off in left field all day
Mhm.
long. Okay. So now another follow-up question, because that's part of it is we keep asking questions,
Mhm.
right? So you said that we want to draw a conclusion that is the teacher's goal for that day.
Mhm.
Is any old goal from any old teacher equally good? Are there particular kinds of goals and hence particular kinds of teachers, presumably the ones who know what those goals are and how to get students there,
Mhm.
that we really should be after?
Yeah. So, good question. So we would probably start with, so if I could use maybe more of a concrete example, right? Because of course this would be done in a concrete example. We would say we've got a school, let's say, that has a certain goal about it. So if it's a Christian school, it wants to create Christian children. So therefore, these conclusions should align with proper Christian doctrine. So yeah, that would be the short answer on that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. And what if we had a school that was focused on, we give the example of being an electrician. So what if you
Mhm.
had a school of electrician training?
Yeah.
We would want the answers then to align with the National Electrical Code or whatever it's called, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So in a theology class, we want it to align with Holy Scripture. And in the electrician class, we want it to align with the electrician code.
Mhm.
Are there other examples?
Mm.
What's another type of class or type of school that we might have?
So if we took kind of philosophy,
Okay.
right? So if that was like a formal one,
Sure.
then to some degree, the conclusion is what I want is that the person comes to an answer that makes logical sense throughout. So
Okay.
they don't have logical inconsistencies.
So we want logical coherence.
Mhm.
Okay. So a theology class, we want biblical truth.
Mhm.
An electrical class, we want the National Electrical Code
Mhm.
correspondence. And a philosophy class, we want logical coherence.
Mhm.
Do we also want logical coherence in theology, or is that unique to the philosophy class?
Yes.
You do want logical?
Yes.
Okay. So we expect things to be biblical and logical.
Mhm.
Now, are biblical and logical ever at odds, or are they always in harmony?
There are times where I don't think they're ever opposed, but there's a point where you have to go beyond the logical.
Okay. So some biblical terms are above and beyond logic.
Mhm.
Other biblical truths are at the same level and in harmony with logic.
Mhm.
And none are opposed to logic. They may appear so at first glance,
Right.
but they're either in harmony or just above and beyond.
Yes.
Like the mystery of the Trinity is.
Yes.
Right.
It's
Okay.
certainly above. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. And then in philosophy, is it merely logical coherence? Is that the best philosophy can give us, or can they also give us correspondence to reality?
Yeah. how many angels can dance on the edge of a spear.
And maybe that's where they need help from theology or other fields or the electrician in order to go beyond merely logical consistency. Because otherwise you could be like in a fantasy world where, we invented a science fiction world and the novel is readable because it's all coherent, but it's not real, right? It's just make-believe. But ideally philosophy would also get to the real, but it might need help from theology or electrical work, right? Okay. All right. So what we've figured out then is Socratic question isn't just asking any kind of question, nor is it trying to get at any sort of conclusion, but rather there are conclusions that are appropriate to that discipline. And there are ways of asking questions that aim us in that direction. But we also don't want to aim too strongly there because then it's a giveaway. We're helping students to think for themselves. And in philosophy, we might not actually know the answer for sure. And even in theology, there are some of those questions where, we don't pin it down because Scripture doesn't pin down everything for us.
Adiaphora, another good Latin term.
There you go. Right. Yeah. Okay. So whether it's the teacher already knows the answer but wants to guide students there in a way that activates their own thinking, or whether the teacher and the students together are learning and trying to get as close as they can, those are two good reasons that the question shouldn't be too direct, right? And then you'll notice what I did with my questions. I asked questions about the previous questions, right? That we're constantly circling back and clarifying. Yeah. And so this sometimes can be annoying, if you read Socrates and he's like, just seems to always be taking people astray. But I think Socrates at his best, and to some degree was Plato and later Aristotle that kind of put a shorter leash on this, ask questions like you were saying that they test out a truth, right? A general claim. And then at one point you went to an example, which was wonderful. Right. And the first example, I think, was theology. And then we went to the electrical work and then the philosophy. Now we have three examples. And now we can step back and we can generalize and we can say, what do they all have in common? Right. Because then we're really learning something. You're no longer learning just about theology or just about electrical work. You're learning about presumably any kind of education, those three things and others. Right.
Yeah.
And so what we're discovering is that sometimes the teacher knows the answer. Sometimes even the teacher isn't quite sure, but at least knows generally the right direction. Always we want students to be moving that direction. But the whole point of not just telling them to copy down what I put on the board into your notebook is we want them to be engaging in that discussion and exploring it, at the very least because it activates their own mind. And also because some of those students may have insights that also teach the teacher, right? For some of those areas where there is room to still grow, right? So for all of those reasons and more, we should do Socratic questioning. Now, we've been silent on some things so far. We haven't talked about how many people should participate in the discussion. Like say you have a room of 20 students. Should we just go down the rows and go to each of the 20 and then go back to the first one again? So they have equal participation? Would that be the most efficient way, back to our factory model, of helping everyone stretch their mind and approach truth?
That's a good question. I'm thinking I would have 23 kids in the classroom when I was teaching senior apologetics and ethics.
Yeah.
And I don't think that would work very well.
Should we choose just the one best student and the professor and the student have a dialogue and everyone else listens in?
I don't think so.
Should we choose several students who tend to carry the conversation toward truth and toward goodness and toward beauty in a way that is constructive and helpful and other students can follow? Should the teacher be asking them a lot of questions and they even start asking each other questions to really carry the discussion? But then we also at times try to include every last other student at least once or twice along the way.
That sounds like a good route.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad you like it because that's what I do. And that's what I plan to do at Luther Classical College.
Yeah. That sounds good.
And I think depending upon which class you're in, it's also going to rotate who those students are because students will have strengths in music or geometry or theology or whatever, but everyone can grow and can learn together so long as we avoid the extremes of saying, well, we want to have everyone participate equally because we value everyone's viewpoint equally. That actually, it sounds fair and nice, but it doesn't value truth or goodness or beauty or objective standards or a real goal. And that's where it really falls short. Why pay tuition just to learn what your classmates think?
Yeah.
But pay tuition to work with your classmates and work with a professor and get towards some real answers in a collegial way with each other.